first question for today, just to start things off for viewers that may not know so much about storyboarding or what it's all about. Just what is storyboarding in a quick overview?
Yes. Well, storyboarding is it's the first chance to visualize a film. You know, if you think about it, you start out with a script, which is words, and the final product is a motion picture. So before you bring out all the cameras and sound equipment and all the crew, it's a chance to take the script and actually look at some pictures. Yeah, it's a chance for the director to think about what kind of shots he would need, he or she would need. And it's usually a rough form. It looks kind of like a comic book, but just drawn in a rough form because it's not a finished product. You know, it's an intermediate step towards doing the actual photography. So,
when you get called in for a job, what are some of the different assignments that you get? Like, at what point do you get called in during the movie making process? Like earlier on or later on?
Yes, yeah. Ideally, it would be early on, when there's time to really, think about things and plan ahead. And then some directors, well, a lot of movies are made without any storyboards at all.
Yeah.
So it's really usually a director's decision about whether to do it. And then you have anywhere from you're more likely to storyboard, an action sequence or a chase or something with, explosions.
Something where the, camera angles are more heavily involved with how the scene plays out, maybe,
yes,
than something where it's, like this with an interview or
exactly, yeah. Traditionally, a director would be less likely to storyboard, a dialogue scene or something, and more likely to storyboard, something with involving stunt people and, something that's going to be very expensive if something's blown up.
Yeah,
they can only do it once, so they really need to know what the shots are going to be ahead of time. But then other directors do storyboard the entire film, including the dialogue scenes. So it's really, and then anything in between. So it sometimes would be just one day of work, all the way to 5 or 6 months of work. So
how much of an influence does the director actually have on your art when you're making it, or is it more he gives you an idea and then sees what you've done after, maybe critiques it at that point?
Well, actually, both those situations can apply. I mean, I think theoretically you are illustrating the director's vision. So on the one level, you might have a director who's already thought a lot about what shots he wants, and he has a shot list, and he just either hands it to you in a paper or tells you, and usually you sit down together, and oftentimes they've already had some of the locations are picked out, so they might either take me to the location in person or show me photographs, and then he would describe the action and what angle he or she would want. But then other cases, there's just a script, like I said, it's just words, and the director, for one reason or another, doesn't tell me really anything. Yeah. And I end up just having to look at the script and try to find out what I can about what the locations look like and what the characters look like. And then I just go and do a rough first pass by myself.
And then take it to
and show that to the director. And a lot of directors would rather have me take the first pass myself, and then they'd like to say, I'd like to see how you would do it, and then they will give it a critique and say, no, I would use a different angle at this point, and that kind of thing.
Is that more common in directors that maybe don't have as much experience and are less confident in their ideas and creativity, and maybe want to see what you have to say first before they and then kind of build off of what you've done?
That's definitely true. I do get a lot of calls for first-time directors, because often the producer will think we need to get the director all the help they can get, and storyboarding is really like a tool that they can use. So it's relatively inexpensive for the production to hire one illustrator to actually do a version where you can kind of look at the storyboards and kind of see what the movie would look like.
In those situations when the director maybe needs as much help as he can get, and needs help with just his ideas and turning that into scenes. Do you sometimes sit around like longer than you would with directors that maybe have more experience? Like, instead of just drawing the pictures and then handing it off to the cameraman, do you sometimes have a role in actually directing, with helping the director turn that into an actual film scene?
Well, that is, see, in a way, if you think about it, if you have a scene and you eventually want to shoot it, but you want to storyboard it first, you have to decide, at least for the storyboards, what are the shots. And see, that's where, ideally, the director should know what shots they want to do, but in practice, a lot of times they don't. A lot of times the director is also the writer, and they're more of a verbal-oriented type person. They think more in terms of words rather than in pictures. So they might feel a little insecure about what would the shot be, and then they're very self-conscious. Oh, I can't draw myself. Sometimes they might draw a stick figure, but even that is helpful to me because it shows how big the head would be in the frame. So that gives me some idea, like, what they're thinking.
Yeah.
But and it's also true in a lot of films, the cameraman really comes up with a lot of the shots too. Some directors, interestingly, even though it's a visual medium, are not that interested in the pictures. They're way more interested in what's the dialogue here. What are the characters? I wrote this screenplay, but they aren't interestingly that concerned with pre-visualizing the pictures.
In those situations, like the director who maybe isn't as comfortable with the actual filming process and doesn't really understand how things are filmed, and there might be a little bit of naivety about like what shots are possible or practical. At that point, does it help you to have a cameraman there kind of critiquing your drawings and telling you, this shot's possible, this shot's not possible, so that you don't make a series of, storyboard art that reflects what the director wants, but isn't possible or practical for the camera crew?
Yes, that's definitely helpful, and usually the cameraman is brought into the process at some point. But if, in my position as a storyboard artist, if the director tells me to draw some shot, I'm going to draw that, and then if he takes that drawing, shows it to the cameraman, and says, cameraman tells me, I'm sorry, that's not possible to get that angle. That's really between those two,
Yeah.
But it is true that I'm going to try to use the best knowledge I have to not draw shots that are impossible to shoot, because that wouldn't really do anyone any good. So I try to do things, and even though I'm not a cameraman myself, I try to think, well, I would think they would be able to do this,
Yeah.
But it is true that in a lot of ways you can really draw anything.
Yeah.
And yet shooting anything is a whole different story. Now, if you get into the field of animation, the storyboard is like the Bible in an animated film, because in animation there's really almost anything is possible. So, and they're really going to look at those storyboards and translate that into the finished animation. Whereas in what I do mainly is live action storyboarding, and a lot of times we'll spend a lot of time storyboarding a sequence, and then they'll shoot it a different way for whatever reason. So I understand that's part of the process, and a lot of times they'll say, even though we shot it differently, it was still very helpful, because it made me sit down and really think about how do I want to shoot this scene.
Yeah, it gives them kind of a starting point, and
exactly.
Even though it might evolve, it gives them
exactly
somewhere to start.
And it's also interesting that I've had a lot of directors who are also writers tell me, like, they have written the script, so it's their idea, and yet when we sit down and storyboard, new ideas come up, and it's just interesting that it's a different part of the brain when you're sitting at your computer typing a script and coming up with ideas. When you actually start to look at pictures, even real rough sketches, oftentimes you'll look at something, oh, you know what if we do this? A whole new idea comes up from looking at pictures. So I think it's using a different part of the brain,
Yeah.
you know, and taking advantage of it.
In that way, would it be safe to say that somebody who is an established artist and is a phenomenal, you know, creator of art might not be as suited to be a storyboard artist as a cameraman who understands how things work, you know, what's possible, practical, and just, you know, how everything fits together when you're actually going out there and creating those scenes?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Because in a way, being a storyboard artist, you have to unlearn a lot of things you learned as a fine artist or someone who does finished illustrations, because you naturally want to make a drawing that's very pretty, or you know, or you want it to look finished. You know, you want to spend really as much time as you need to get the drawing right. But in storyboarding, you're often under a lot of pressure to do a whole lot of drawings in very little time. And you know that it's not going to do the director any good to spend a whole lot of time on 3 frames and they look beautiful, they're all shaded and everything, and yet they say, what's the rest of the scene?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't have time to do it. You know, that,
And they might just end up scrapping that scene that you've done if they don't like it, and they've got to start over.
Well, but yeah, they'd have to scrap the idea of storyboarding it if they ran out of time. So it's really important when I get a scene to do, I kind of look at the whole scene. I don't look at it individual frames yet. And I try to block the whole scene out. It might be 50 frames, might even be 100 or even more. But I really try to block them out in a really rough form of kind of layouts first and get them all in there, and then start to work up and put more detail in. And then I always show an early version to the director first, because I don't want to spend a lot of time refining drawings that the director does not want anyway. You know, so there's little ways you realize you have to kind of be efficient. But it's like you said, you do, you know, someone who can draw like Rembrandt or something might not be the best person to do a storyboard, simply because their drawing's going to look beautiful, but you know, they might not as efficient. Right, exactly. So
once you're, you know, done with your artwork and you've brought back the director, how much do they really like take what you've done and, you know, say, I like this, I don't like this, and make you go back and change what you've done and refine it and you know, to make it something new? Like, how much do they make you I don't know, like redo parts?
Right, revisions. Yes, there's a lot of that is, there are often a lot of revisions. Occasionally there's almost none. And then occasionally the production doesn't have enough budgeted to do revisions, so the director has no choice but to just take what you did. That's in the case of television, that's more common, because television is a much faster production process, and you know, there's way less time to prepare. So they would just oftentimes not have as much time to do revisions. But usually there are revisions, because again, it's the director's vision, ideally, of the movie, and you know, you're not going to get it exactly the way they see it the first time out, usually. So,
so like, you know, that's in movies for the most part, right? But you just mentioned TV shows as well. How many like different, you know, areas of filming do they actually use storyboarding, as far as like, you know, commercials, television, TV, you know, movies? Like, how much they really use storyboarding in just different mediums?
Yes, well, they are used in all those different media. There's also different kinds of storyboarding. You know, commercials often use what they call presentation boards, which are more finished drawings, often in color, and those are drawn up and sometimes put on a big, you know, board with all the frames laid out, and then they present that to the client. They say, this is what we're thinking, this is how we'd like to shoot, what this commercial for your product would look like.
So in that case, it might have to look
a
little more finished.
Yes, exactly, much more finished, often in color.
Oh, I see.
But then what I'm working at the other end, which they call shooting boards, which are a little more technical, and they're usually not in color. They're usually a little bit rougher, but they actually reflect the shots more than the presentation boards. And sometimes I'll be given a presentation board that was already drawn by some other illustrator. But then at this point they've decided we're going to go ahead and shoot this commercial. They revisit it and figure out, okay, what actual shots are we going to need, and make a shot list from that. And then so that when the camera crew goes out and starts shooting, they'll know real specifically what shots they need.
I see.
And then the third thing is, in television, in terms of storyboarding, like I say, it's often very short, because television, they might be shooting a whole season, and they're not even done the scripts for episode 3. They're shooting episode 1. They're still writing episode 3 or 2 even. Mm-hmm. So there's very little time. And so when on a television show, it's usually just very few days of work for me, compared to a feature film, which can be weeks or months, because just by the nature, they have more prep time, and it's only, you're saying, an hour and a half or 2 hours of finished film, compared to a television, 12 episodes in 1 hour. That's 12 hours of TV. So they just have to. It's more like guerrilla filmmaking with television. There's not enough time really for storyboarding.
Oh, I see. So are there television shows that maybe don't use storyboards?
Oh, a lot.
At all?
Yeah, a lot.
A lot of them
would use none at all.
I see.
Because again, I think it's something that's kind of brought over from film.
Yeah.
And it's a great tool. I mean, I think ideally that the television directors would love to use it, but
it's just not. It's
a time thing, and they have so much on their plate and so little prep time that there's just not real time to do storyboarding, for television. So although some shows, like especially that are like a higher quality, they treat the television more like a film, and they do allow enough time for some storyboarding.
Messi. Oh, brilliant skill from Lionel Messi. Surging forward with real menace here. Brilliant from Messi. Oh, what a goal that is!